Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Harder Not Smarter podcast. Today we have Greg Putnam, the former Navy SEAL who's decided to get into cattle ranching, owns a massive, or at least runs a massive plot of land out in Montana. I haven't actually asked if you own it. 20,000 acres or something, running Little Belt Cattle Company.
Yeah, correct. Little Belt Cattle
Little
Company.
Belt Cattle Company, bringing premium beef back to Americans. I love the story you guys have. You and Tim Sheehy, who we had on a few weeks ago, started up this cattle ranch, and it is everyone that I've talked to and referred your beef to. Sounds weird saying that. Referring your beef.
Nice meat, man.
Yeah, you got great meat.
Mhm.
Has been singing your guys' praises. So, Greg, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to hear a little bit about your story going from team guy to rancher, and excited to have you on the show.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you very much. I appreciate you guys having me on and looking forward to visiting with you as well.
So, you joined the teams in 2008, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And spent the majority of your career out in SDV, the SEAL delivery vehicle unit out in Hawaii. I mean, get stationed. How early in your career were you out there?
I went there, so I literally got voluntold out there right out of SQT. So we had a handful of guys in my class that had all wanted to go to STVs, and like I'm sure as you guys are familiar, that was not the most popular command on people's dream sheets, and it was not on my dream sheet at all. So I was supposed to stay in San Diego, and then we had a couple guys that had all volunteered to go to Hawaii to go to STV, basically failed jump school right at the end. And so they needed some guys to go out there. And they sent a guy out from the command, and, he gave this great sales pitch of just how amazing STV was in Hawaii and all this stuff. And then at the end of it, he was like, "Who's coming with me?" And not a single hand went up. I mean, he promised the world to everybody.
He did the Jerry Maguire.
It was honestly you'll be, better looking. Everything about you will improve. It's the greatest command of all time. Who's coming with me? And everybody just sat there and so then they did what the Navy does. And, the next day, there's about 9 of us who had been, selected to fill those spots. And so, yeah, I went right there, right out of SQT, and that was like my first command. I spent about 5 years.
And was he right? Was it?
Yeah.
No, he was not right at all. Great command overall. Like it's a really interesting command within the SEAL teams. Just because it's small. You don't hear a ton about it. The mission set is pretty interesting. It's a very specialized skill set. And, it was one of those things that it ended up being like an amazing opportunity, amazing command to be at. I got to do some really great things out of that command, and it really set me up kind of for some unique opportunities within the SEAL teams. But it's a tough command to be at. I mean, you just are diving so much. And when I got out of Buzz and SQT, I mean, both Iraq and Afghanistan were still, it full on happening. And everybody obviously wanted to go to those places, and you end up at this kind of very like strategic command as a brand new guy. It takes a minute to kind of realize the impact on a large scale that command is actually like having. And like I said, it was an amazing opportunity, but in the very beginning you kind of go like, wait, what are we doing? And how much time are we going to be diving? And so that's where I went right out of the gate.
So I think other than Tim, I think you're the first STV guy we've had on the show. For what you're allowed to talk about, give the audience a little bit of a rundown of what type of stuff you guys do, and more importantly, what the training looks like, the exhaustion dives that you guys are doing and everything.
Yeah, for sure. So SDV is SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 1. It's basically a small wet submersible capability that it's a highly specialized kind of trained insert-exert platform primarily. So after you complete BUDS and SQT like every other SEAL, you go to another 6-month training in just SDV and undersea operations. And so that command there really focuses on undersea warfare, which can cover a variety of different things from just insert exert, and then when you go on land, you're doing standard SEAL operations to a number of things, subsurface as well. But it's a really unique capability in that it's truly one of the only truly covert insert exert zero um, signature ways to get people anywhere at the coastline, basically, to get people in and out. But to do that, typically you're doing these very long duration dives. You could be locking out of submarines, you could be coming off of surface vessels, and once you're in the water and in the actual wet submersible. So a wet submersible is basically, if you think about it, probably the best way to think about it is like a minivan that goes and travels underwater, but it fills up with water. So when you're in the mini sub, you're breathing on like a standard hookah, and that could be like a standard, like a dragger, a standard, uh, like just regular scuba. I
Compressed
can't
air.
remember. Yeah, compressed air deal. And you would switch depending on what you were doing and where you were at in that dive profile. Um, but yeah, I mean, you just cram a bunch of guys in there and get them from point A to point B, and uh, it's one of those things. But it's filled with water, so there's little to no communication. It There is the capability to basically be able to verbally communicate, but basically nobody in the front wants to hear the people in the back complaining about how long and terrible
So
it
it's
is.
like the reverse of a limousine when the people in the back put up the privacy
Yeah,
shield. The guys in the
yeah.
front are like, man, we're not listening to you.
We don't want to hear that. And so there's literally like a little button that has a light, and you just like hit that button and it communicates different things. Um, but you'd get underwater and
And
you'd
are you
have
guys
these.
like mouthpiece, like normal scuba, or do you have a full face?
Typically, it would be a full face,
Okay.
and sometimes you could do both, and just they. It depended on what you were doing and kind of what level of discomfort you were going to select for the day. There was no great way like, oh, this was so much better than the other. Kind of just depended on what you wanted to do, and there was like pros and cons to both. But you'd have these earpieces if you did try to go on this like through water communications, but they'd start ringing in your ears. And then once you're underwater, there's nothing you could change, right? So it'd be like if your headphones right now just were like for hours, and there's nothing you could do. Like if you started to get cold in that thing, stand by. It was only going to get worse. And so, it was like one of those things that made you get very, very systematic about your approach. Because once you're underwater, I mean, if you drop, I mean, I've seen guys drop something like a critical piece of equipment that was needed, and you just rode in underwater for hours, and then they drop something that you need and it's gone, and you just end up riding back. And you both can imagine how that was received by the rest of the team when you returned to wherever you were going for the person that that would that happened to. And
Yeah.
uh but yeah,
The,
it
the
was a
the
sorry, go ahead.
best description that someone told me about SCVs was he's like, so you're in this tube. It's usually dark. You're just sitting in there. You're basically scissored or tandem, like a bobsled with the guy for hours and hours. You're enclosed. You're uncomfortable, and you start panicking a little bit, and everything keeps closing in on you. And right at that point, when you feel like you just can't take it any longer, you're halfway through the dive.
Yeah, I've so I remember one time I had a watch on and I'll tell you when I used to wear a watch during these events. But I remember I was like, I'm not going to look at my watch for an hour. Like I'm going to go a solid hour. So I was in the STV and I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh yeah, it's definitely been an hour. I'm going to go hard. I'm going to go an hour and a half and not look at my watch. So I'm like, all right, it's been like a solid hour and a half, like no doubt. Gave it a few extra minutes, to make sure I'd gotten there. And I'm not kidding. I looked at my watch, 6 minutes. And I I took my watch off. I opened the door. I threw it out the door, and I shut the door. And then, because and what you don't realize is like you're stuck alone in your own thoughts for hours at a time, like in the pitch black there's no entertainment. So you just find out how weird you are multiple times throughout the week, with just having to sit quietly alone underwater breathing.
What
And
was the weirdest conversation you had with yourself?
oh, I don't even know if it's appropriate for podcast.
Send it.
Yeah,
We can
no.
edit out. We will actually won't edit it out, but we'll tell you we'll edit it out.
Yeah. I mean, I've told this story before, and I hate to like recycle stories, but it's funny. So like, you know that Adele song, "Someone Like You."
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
It's a nice song. Like, it's like "Someone Like You," whatever. And I was in the van driving.
Wait, do that again. Can you
that was my best Adele. So I'm in the SUV and I'm driving. I'm sorry, I'm in a van driving to go get into the SUV, and that song comes on. And I'm like, man, what a nice song. This is great. So I get out, I get in the STV, and it's stuck in my head. And I'm just sitting there, like, listening to that song in my head. Like, what a nice song. Like, that somebody would write this about somebody else. By like hour 2, I was like, nobody would ever write something like this about me. I am the biggest loser. I owe every woman and girlfriend I've ever had an apology. By the end of the thing, I was like in such a depression. And I was just like, this is a horrible song. This is a terrible song. Why would anybody write this song about somebody else? Someone like you? Like, nobody wants to hear that. And you would just go through these like horrible ups and downs. But that was one that like and that would be like a couple times a week. That one just stuck with me because by the time I got out, and I can't hear that song anymore, because by the time I was done with it, I mean, I was like, this is a terrible, like, nobody would say that about anybody. Like, this is someone, like, nobody wants to hear that. And that's kind of what would happen. But you would just,
The
and then
phases
what would
of
happen,
Adele.
yeah, and then what would happen was you'd get to wherever you were going. And so you'd be sitting in that thing for hours and hours and hours, and then you'd get to wherever you were going. And then you had to get out and go and, go do SEAL stuff. So you had to have this like very, you had to go from your own little personal nightmare of being stuck in the SDV underwater for hours and hours, and then like mindset change to go do SEAL stuff. And let's just put it this way: your combat effectiveness maybe would not be at its best when you were first getting out of there. It would take a little long. Remember how like they used to make you do change out drills and all that stuff? They'd be like 20 minutes. You'd always hear this in butts like SDV guys can do this in 10 minutes. It's like, maybe they could, but they would choose not to because it would take, a good amount of time to just get
decompress.
Yeah, like refueled up. Because if you were in dry suits or something, you can't. I mean, they're like you couldn't go to the bathroom, so you. You could. There was all these different things you could do. All of them were terrible. So you only had a couple options. Like and everybody, like all of my buddies and stuff. Not all of them, but some of them would be like, oh, like being a SEAL must be really cool. Like you get all this cool equipment and like you get to do all these wild, cool things. And there's nothing quite as uncool as putting on an adult diaper under your dry suit before you're going to go do like an 8-hour dive. And it was not that you were like planning to maybe use the adult diaper, but it was just in case because there was no, yeah, but like, so you'd be like super dehydrated because you want to pee in the adult diaper. Or I don't know how much you guys want to talk about this stuff, but like, or you had this, this condom catheter, which is like basically like a condom, like everybody's familiar with, that you would roll on, and then you like it had like a reservoir tip, but it would have like a tube connected that would go out your leg, and then you could pee, but you couldn't pee like too much, or it would basically just come off, and then you'd pee all over yourself. And so that again, not a very like great solution. So ultimately, the solution would be just dehydrate yourself for hours before this thing so you didn't have to pee. And then definitely don't eat because you didn't want to do the alternative either. So the operator and environment of the SDV was like extremely challenging, just being underwater, obviously. But what it did do was make for like really good detail, oriented operators that were like super systematic about like how they did things and where you put things. And to be honest, there were some unbelievable, like just operators as a whole that came out of that command. A lot of guys had like really a lot of success in different commands after leaving STV Team 1. And then the weirdest thing started happening where a lot of people wanted to go to that command because of the strategic, kind of impact that it was having, especially as the war started to kind of die down a little bit. So then there was this shift where all of our new guys had chose to come to STV, and a lot of those were like truly like some of the best performers out of their Buds and SQT classes. And somebody told me the other day that there's now a screening process to go to that command.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Which at the time, I mean, when I went there, if they had been like, "There's a screener," it would have been like, "Yeah, right, dude." Like nobody would have showed up. Like, "Yeah, right."
When I finished my first platoon, first off, when I finished SQT, no one was allowed to go directly to STV. You had to do traditional platoon time first, and then at least on the officer side, you had to do a full screener, like screening green team type stuff, in terms of giving a full mission brief, go through contingencies and all these types of things. It was extremely hard to get over there. They wanted to make sure that there was guys with longevity, that they would stay there for a while, and that basically they were getting the cream of the crop. I mean, with the war grinding, or with the wars winding down, people saw this as where the next action was going to be. Everyone leaving the teams, not leaving, but moving around in the teams, either wanted to leave and go to like the CIA, or they wanted to get to the more strategic commands like STV and DevGru.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, like, on the officer side, because of that screening process, we had awesome, like really, like truly, we had amazing people. And, and like I said, the operators at the command as a whole, it was just it just environmentally, it was just I tell people all the time, like when I see other SEAL team guys, you kind of give them the like bro shake. Hey, what's up, man? When I see an SDV brother, even if I've never met him before, but guys like, hey, you like bring it in for like a hug, like two orphans, where you're just like, bring it in, brother. Like, you give them an extra squeeze. You're like, only people that have been at that command can truly appreciate. But you're absolutely right. I mean, as that was happening, you saw a lot of people going over to those types of commands and wanting to be at those. But the officer screening pipeline that they had for a bit to go over there is what I was told recently was they're doing a similar process now and have no problem getting people into that. Which again, when I went to that command, they would have been like, "Yeah, right, dude." But again, great command. Like again, great people. Probably like And so I went from there, and then I got hurt at that when I was there, and then I went to the East Coast. But I remember, kind of being on the East Coast then, and just the cool part about SDV is it's much smaller. The command as a whole is only a couple platoons, and it's just a small command, so there's not that many team guys there. So everybody, basically all the platoons kind of interact on the weekends. It doesn't matter like what your rank is, where you're, it was the community at that team was awesome. And I think that was another thing that made it just a great experience as a whole. I mean, some of just amazing people across the board, and still some of my best friends.
Did the command bring in stuff like breath work, mindset, meditation type gurus to teach you guys different techniques to just sit there in silence for 8, 10, 12 hours?
Yeah, they did. And we had some great people with the human performance, programs. They'd bring in people. We did these like free dive courses and breath hold courses and all these things. And, they were good. They were helpful. I will say you would go through those things. You have this like great breath hold while you're doing it, in the pool, and you're doing these free dives and all this stuff. And then like the minute your scuba apparatus would like die on you, you'd have a 3-second breath hold, and all of a sudden you just
that's how it was during second phase during the pool comp stuff. You're like, oh yeah, I'm in great shape. I can hold my breath. As soon as they rip that regulator out of your mouth, you're screwed.
Yeah.
Like, where's the air?
And so there's only so much. I mean, again, there's only so much you can do.
But not so much breath holding for like free diving, like more like Wim Hof
Yeah,
box breathing type stuff.
unfortunately, like they kind of did, but not really. I mean, they were teaching that 4-for-4 breathing. Eventually, though, the only thing you could do was just sit there and like the only thing to focus on was your breathing. So almost naturally, especially in basically a nonstop effort to be constantly breathing out, so you would avoid because you couldn't control, um, and this might not be the right word, but like your ascent descent rates because you're
Mm-hmm.
in the mini sub. So like when that thing would dive away, you couldn't control the speed at which you were ascending or descending. So you constantly had to be, these long drawn out breaths because you never wanted to hold your breath. And so you ultimately would just sit there. I mean, that's kind of all you had to focus on was just breathing. But I think you just naturally kind of, I guess we all like learned about that, but they didn't have a ton of people. Like we didn't go through like a lot of, training stuff on that. It was more just, especially as a new guy, it's just like, yeah, get in, don't move around a lot, and we'll let you know when to get out. And you're just like, and they like, there's no room in that thing either. I guess that's the other thing I should hit on. It doesn't matter how big you are, if you're a new guy, basically the pilot comes and everybody else. So like as you get seniority for certain parts of the operation STB, it just that allows you to decide to say like I'm going to get in first and sit here, right? So you got to like pick your seat in the STB. If you were a brand new guy, the pilot or navigator would come back and basically like 1 and 2 and 3 and push you in and just shut the door. So however your like head was stuck, your fin was stuck, like you were in, and that's how you were riding for the next hours at a time. So you had to develop a lot of like just mental, um, I don't know, like you just had to develop whatever worked for you, a system that but I think it was a little different for how everybody managed that situation.
No one can prepare you for Adele playing in your head hours on end. Like
No.
there's nothing that can prepare you for that. I think that's just, you got to go through it.
If they made an SDV dive part of BUDS or SQT, I think you would get a lot of quitters.
Oh, for sure.
And I have SEAL team buddies, and these are all like hardcore dudes. Like they're like solid team dudes, and they're like I wouldn't, and I'm like, well, what else are you gonna do? Like when you got there, like at that point, you're gonna be like, no, like I'm not gonna do this, and like 99% of the things in the teams, right? Like you just didn't want your friends to think you were, um, you know,
You
being
can
a
say
pussy. Yeah. And so like, I don't know how classy you guys keep it on this thing.
We don't
not
keep it
very.
classy.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So like, you just don't want your friends to think you're a pussy. And so like, you just do all the stuff, and even though you're terrified but it's one of those things that gets better as you do it. And the longer you're there, you just figure out a way to just, everybody gets super grumpy before they would get in that thing. And then you just get in. And once you were in, you were just kind of there for the ride. And, and you just figured out a way to work through it. But there was a huge mind shift that had to happen, from just sitting there to even just like doing underwater operations and getting all your shit ready to go do the next stage. Right. But you very much had to change from just playing Adele to then like, oh, now I got to go and do SEAL team stuff. And I think that was like an interesting thing that everybody just kind of had to figure out.
How to flip that switch.
Yeah, how to flip that switch and then be ready to kind of go into like more of a higher performance mode from just this kind of sedentary, like just sitting waiting. But it was very long. That feeling where like you almost are like, all right, let's just get on with it. Like, let's get going. And you always kind of have that feeling, especially in the military. And it's usually on that, kind of, it's just waiting for it to get started, right?
There's like almost like weight mentality.
Yeah, but there's like almost like I don't know, like if it's anxiety, it's like performance anxiety where you're like, let's do it. Like, let's get on with this thing. Like, let's stop talking about it. Like that period in the SCV was very long because you were just in there for so long, and eventually like it would just kind of wean because you were in there for so long. But then all of a sudden all of a sudden it was time to get out. You're like, oh, I got to get going here and start getting kind of in work mode. But again, I think that created just a type of operator that had to be like really committed to having like a system on how they did things, and it made you extremely like detail oriented in how you were doing like every little thing.
How does your body feel getting out of there, like and then switching into SEAL mode and getting on objective?
Yeah,
Is it
terrible.
terrible? Okay, that's what I figured.
Yeah, terrible. Yeah, you'd get out of that. Like, I don't care if we were doing a training dive, like you would get out, and like the medical people, like, like standard diving operations, right? Like people would ask you like, oh, do you have this? I remember I got hurt diving out there and they were like, did you feel like this? And did you have this? I'm like, yeah, I felt terrible. You just don't feel good after doing any of those things. And yeah, that was something, you kind of had to, again, like have to have a system to get yourself like back in the ability to, whether it was a physical evolution or just mental evolution or just turn that switch. So everybody had, kind of I'm just going to call it like a re-nutrition, rehydrating plan. And I'm making light of it, but everybody had, a plan in place that worked for them to get yourself ready to go. But sometimes it would take, you had to allot, on the planning side, you had to allot more time than you typically would think you would need to let everybody get refueled up. And that was just part of the overall kind of mission planning, was you had to account for the fact that people were coming out of that thing and were not going to be at their highest level of, combat effectiveness, without a little bit of time to, to get, themselves kind of ready to go.
And at what point in your career did you grow that magnificent uh, Burt Reynolds mustache?
Well,
It is very Burt Reynolds-esque.
That's right.
Yeah, like very Magnum PI. I mean, and he was on Hawaii too, so
that's right. Well, Tim and a bunch of guys I don't know if you've ever seen that picture of Burt Reynolds where he's laying naked on that bare rug.
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Yeah,
so they used to walk around.
What straight man hasn't seen that photo?
I mean, none that I know. And so they used to walk around, like if we'd be at a bar or something, and they'd go up to girls at the bar and show them that picture, and be like, yeah, that's the guy right there. And believe it or not, like women don't find that picture to be overly, like they're not like, oh,
weird.
Look at that sexy. Like they're like, oh, why would you do? And these like people would come up to me like, why would you do that? And I'm like, do what? And they're like, lay on that bare naked and take those pictures. I was like, yeah, that's not me. But no, I had like a very similar mustache in the teams. And I remember I came back to Hawaii one time after being on a trip, and a lot of the Master Chiefs were, it can only be one thing. They were very jealous of the mustache that I came back with. So one of them came up to me and was like, hey, like that thing is out of regs and you need to get that. Like, and I was like, no, this is in regs. And then another one came up to me and was just like, hey, it's too much. Like you got to tone it down. And I was
too
like,
much power.
negative. Yeah. And so what I noticed was like, if I went into admin or anywhere admin for people that aren't in the military, admin is kind of like the DMV, depending on what your rank is. They just treat you like shit for no reason. And you go in there, you never have the right paperwork. You never have, what they claim you need. And typically you get turned away 3 or 4 times before you get done what you actually need done. But what I realized when I'd walk in with the mustache, especially if I didn't have a uniform on that had any rank insignia on it, they treated me amazing. And they must have thought that I was far higher ranking than I actually was. And so
you must be a Master Chief with that thing.
Exactly. So, much to many of the jealous Master Chiefs' dismay at the time, I had that for a while. And then, when I got out, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to bring that thing back. And I've had it now for a good clip. Probably had it like, I don't know. It's been a good growth.
I mean, if you're going to grow a mustache, Montana's definitely the place to do it. And then on top of that, next level is you're running a cattle ranch with that mustache.
Exactly. And once you get out of the
persona.
The pedophile grow stage that nobody wants to go through again, because that usually deters most mustache growers. They're like, they get to a certain point and they're like, I can't do it. Like, I can't do it. And once you get through that weird stage, you just stick with it. You know, it's
Well,
like growing your hair out. You're like,
typically the growth pattern for growing a mustache is you grow the beard and then you
yes,
shave everything else around it. In the
yep,
military, because you can't have the beard, it forces people to just go through this
the pedophile stage.
unacceptable,
Yeah.
atrocious phase of stuff on your lip. It's just a dirty lip.
Yeah, nobody likes it. It's not a
No.
good look. And then eventually you get over that, and then you're like, all right, like, and you know you're there. Like if you go to the barbershop and you get trimmed up, and they're like, let's trim that up a little bit. And when you start having to trim the mustache, that's when you know you're committed to the you know to the lifestyle.
When it starts curling into your lip or into
That's
your
right.
mouth.
That's right. That's right. But yeah, you know, and Montana's a great. And it's funny, you know, because
Are you from
some people
Montana?
grow. What's that? No, I was
Are you
born in
from?
Pennsylvania,
Okay.
and then I moved to Montana before I was in the Navy, and worked there for a little bit. My cousin played football out here, and yeah, so I moved out here, and we lived here for a number of years before I joined the teams, and then we kind of knew we were going to come back. We just weren't sure exactly when.
And when in your career did you meet Tim and form the relationship you guys have now?
Yeah, so Tim came over to SDVs like probably like 2012 or 2013. So I was going into my second platoon. He had done a couple East Coast platoons and deployments. And then he came over and was in my platoon on my second go round. And we just became buddies and worked obviously a ton together there at the command. And then he got out of the Navy in want to say like 2015, and I got out in 2017. And then we had kind of talked about doing some stuff together. When I got out, he had started two companies at that point, uh, Bridger Aerospace and Ascent Vision Technologies, which was a military defense tech company. And so when I got out in 17, I came over and started working for Ascent Vision, kind of on the early beginning of that. And I was doing just kind of everything that you do at startups as far as like the tech
It's a
side
jack
goes.
of all
So
trades.
yeah, I mean, we were doing everything from product development, business development, sales, you know, trade shows, stuff breaks, fix it, you know, just trying to get product out there. But that company was, you know, ultimately was extremely successful, and we built and grew that. And ultimately, what led that company to where it went to was building a counter drone system, utilizing basically these gyro stabilized cameras and then connecting those with a radar and a defeat technology. It was one of the first, we worked with the Marine Corps on developing that, but it was one of the first counter drone technologies that was actually like working, that you could run off smaller platforms. So you could actually run that off of like those M razors, and it could defeat small, like store bought, Amazon bought drones that these guys started to use. Basically, you know, right in that like 27, right about when I was getting out, you started to see more of that, and
Mm-hmm.
really no defense to it, right? And you could buy these $500-600 drones, weaponize them. You know, bad guys were using them the exact same way that we were using in working ISR, and there was really no defeat to them. And so the system that ultimately that company and I was part of helping kind of develop that, you know, was the first one that really started to work well and was mobile enough that, you know, it wasn't this massive footprint. But we basically took our experience from, you know, from the Navy and from the battlefield, et cetera, and just kind of applied that into that. And then that company ended up getting bought by CACI or CACI in 2020. And, you know, a lot of the reason that was because of the success that that technology was having on the battlefield.
And was this using? Are we basically jamming frequencies? Was it using direct radiation stuff? How is it going against drones?
Yeah, so it was kind of a three-part system. And sorry, I might not have all this right. I haven't done this spiel in a while. So it was a
Putting you on
radar
the spot.
detection. The radar would basically detect it, and then on the operating system, the operator could basically select, you know, what the radar was finding, and you could see like drone patterns were very different than birds, etc. So you would basically manually select a target. The camera would cue onto that, so it would immediately like lock onto it. You could positively identify, you know, what you were looking at, and then you would jam with an electronic warfare system. There was a number of ones that we were already using for like counter IED, counter
Mm-hmm.
drone. But what was happening prior to a system where there was positive identification of a target was that you would just have to run those jammers all the time, which obviously would negatively impact communication, on U.S. forces, potentially partner forces, and it also isn't a like from a operator health perspective, having like a jammer literally right behind your head running 24/7.
Yeah, for
uh,
anyone not familiar, jammers basically put out a bunch of noise at different frequencies, and so anything with radio waves, so all your radios and communication things, it blocks those too. And there's ways to go against it. You can like select certain frequencies that it would leave out, and you can communicate on those channels. But like any other EM outputting machine, you really don't want to have those nearby you too often. Like even cell phones, there's stuff coming out about how there's potential cancer stuff. You don't want to be having a broadband radio frequency just broadcasting constantly uh, behind your head. There's all
Yeah, and
kinds
they're
of cancer
right.
stuff coming.
The antennas are literally right behind your head, and you're walking around with that. Some of them were like backpack worn, other ones were like vehicle. Um, and so, what was cool about that, like any system, right? Like, there's very few defensive systems out there, whether that's from guns all the way down to electronic stuff, where you don't have to positively identify your target, and that ultimately was what was happening kind of in that space. And um, that system was really interesting because it could pick up like multiple threats, but it could pick up these really small drones at a distance. And because it was a radar based system, you could use radar for other things. um, but that system was really impactful and found a lot of success on the battlefield, which is actually cool because like when I got out in 2017, um, obviously your relevance of what like that relevance window is closing like immediately when you get out. So people
Mm-hmm.
ask me now questions about the military stuff, and I'm like, I have no idea. Like I've been out, you know, almost. I mean, I was in for 10 years. I've been out for almost 7. So I'm like, hey, like I'm approaching being out longer than I was in, right? And it just changes so fast anymore. But it was cool to take kind of what we had like lessons learned, from that stuff and apply it, but also feel like you were still having a positive impact on U.S. forces in helping them, especially to like a really tough threat. But I need to talk to guys. I mean, guys that were in different places because a lot of that was when the ISIS thing was happening. But like I talked to some Army SF buddies who had they had like mustard gas canisters dropped on them from those drones. They were using those drones to identify where U.S. forces was and then setting up ambushes against them. They were doing all sorts of things. So it was kind of cool to help. You still felt like you had like a positive impact, on the military side because you guys, I mean, when you get out, obviously it's tough where you feel like you not only are you losing this like kind of purpose and just it's a very big part of not only what you do but kind of who you are coming out of those communities. And so I think from a transition perspective, it was a cool way to kind of progress out, still not feeling like you were doing like fully like the contracting thing where you were kind of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. It was very much we were out of the military, but still having kind of a positive impact by the the company that Tim had started, and I feel like I had a small part in helping kind
So
of build
so when
it
you
out.
got out, you'd already been coordinated with Tim. You had this uh, as a lined up job, so you immediately went right into this.
Sort of, like any startup, right? Like the timing of hiring people is always tricky.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell people all the time, like the teeter totter is never perfect. So the military is tough because you have a hard end date, right? Like it's not like you can go like, hey, I'll extend a little bit better till it's a better time to hire me. There's like this very finite day where it's like your pay is done, your benefits are done, and you got to have it figured out on that day. And there's no real way to extend that. Where if you work in the civilian sector, I mean, and you wanted to quit your job and go work somewhere else, like just don't tell anybody you're going to quit, right? And just keep showing up. And if you don't get fired, you could probably extend that up until like the right time, and then make the change. Um, so Tim and I have been in comms like throughout, from when he got out. Um, and as I got closer and I'd come out to Montana a couple times, we were hoping that that was going to work out on both sides, but obviously it's got to work out from, a business side where they've got not only a position for you, but the ability to, cover you on payroll, et cetera. And so I was interviewing it wasn't like a guaranteed, like 100%, hey, we
Mm-hmm.
know we can bring you on. I was interviewing at a bunch of places. We knew we wanted to be in Montana. And I always tell people, for like your military folks, active duty guys and gals that listen, I think you got to do two things when you get out. You got to figure out either exactly what you want to do or where you want to be. And you got to answer one of those questions to make that transition. And if because sometimes what you want to be dictates where you got to go. And other times it's like, hey, if I want to be here, I'm probably not going to have the same opportunities. And it'd be unrealistic to think that you're going to get, some high up job in tech or finance and live in Montana, right? It's probably more doable now, but at the time, this was all pre-COVID, so there wasn't a lot of like
Mm-hmm.
remote work. But we knew we wanted to be in Montana, so then it was kind of on me to figure out like what I was going to do. So Tim and I were talking about it, very closely. And fortunately for me, like he gave me an opportunity when truly I needed one more than I probably ever have. And his business was at a place where they could bring me on. And I was obviously at a place where I needed an opportunity. And so it just worked out, honestly, just like kind of one of those things where just life worked out, right? And it ended up working out, I think, great on both ends because I was coming out of the military at that point. Obviously, I could speak that language. My background was in that space. I could go brief that stuff. I had street cred from the units I was coming out of at that point, and I understood that kind of the technical side of you know of like where warfare, I guess, was going. And so it worked really well, but it wasn't like a guaranteed, like, oh yeah, it was kind of one of those things like, hey, we'll see what we can do. And I was like, yeah, I'd love to do it if it works. And then it all just kind of came together.
And with your, let's jump into the cattle ranch. You say while you were working.
Is it like Yellowstone? I mean, and don't disappoint me and say it's not. Let's just pretend like it is.
Yeah, no, 100% it is.
Okay.
If your neighbor makes you upset, you can
100%.
shoot them. You can gunfight
Yes.
in Bozeman, Montana. You only can go on full auto though, and you can spray bullets.
Interesting.
You got to go on full auto. You got to have no regard for anybody around, and you just got to spray machine gun fire everywhere.
Do you have like a ditch off point where you like ditch all your bodies? Is that like
Yeah,
that's a real thing
absolutely.
too, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. There's no, law enforcement, which is nice, so nobody would find that pit.
We also has
Yeah.
20,000 acres, so it's like happy hunting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So but no, it's exactly like that.
I'm also guessing that this question is like playing Stairway to Heaven at a guitar center. You get it probably
Yellowstone's
people get so
actually a
much.
documentary. I don't know if you know that, but it's a documentary. It's not,
It's not advertised, but it actually is a documentary.
It is. Yeah. And so, everybody that shows up in Montana ready to, jump into the Yellowstone life, it's they're not disappointed because it's exactly like they used to be.
So living out there, and because you've been out there since 2017,
Mm-hmm.
so you've been there pre-COVID, pre-mass exodus of all these California yuppies that are like, yeah, we don't like California more. We're just going to go to Montana. How entertaining is it for you, and how disappointing is it for you? Seeing all the people come out there, but also them getting out there and realizing that it's actually hard living. When you deal with seasons, unlike most Californians, and you have actual snow and cold weather, just seeing them languish and not understand how to survive in. I mean, obviously they're not just freezing to death on the side of the street, but just being miserable, being in a place that they didn't realize what life was like out there.
Yeah, honestly, it's interesting because I obviously moved here. I moved here, but before a lot of,
Before
but
it
I
was
still
cool.
moved. Yeah, but I still moved here. You know what I mean? Like and and I'll talk about it in a minute, but like our current business now, like we've got great customers and a lot of those people who moved here, you have a lot of people that moved here for the right reasons, right? They wanted to leave where they were going. COVID at the time opened up opportunity to work remotely. So you could still have, like very good paying jobs. When I first moved to Montana, it was not uncommon to have, most people I knew had multiple jobs. And, to basically be out here and kind of support yourself, you had to do multiple things, right? There wasn't the ability, there was only so many types of jobs that by today's standard, quote unquote paid well. So you typically had to have like multiple things that you did. And, you know, post COVID or during COVID, where you had the ability to work remotely, I think it opened up the opportunity for people to, retain, um, you know, good, high paying, like urban jobs that were not there. That just was not a thing before then.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got, my brother lives here, and him and his wife have jobs that would fall in that category. And, thank God they do, because that allowed them to be here. I think a lot of people got here, and you know, there's the reality. A lot of people got here, and then a lot of people left. A lot of people stayed. Fortunately for a lot of the people who moved here, they didn't have to worry about freezing to death, because most of their houses were enormous, and they had, plenty of capability to stay warm. But you can't complain about, and I say this to people all the time. I'm like, well, do you like the nice restaurants? Do you like that like bands come and play in Montana now? Do you like the fact that there's an airport that you can like travel in and out of very easily? Well, none of that happens without people being here and supporting that stuff, right? There's a big tourist market here in Montana. And what I do see, honestly, is a lot of people who move to Montana like truly love the state. They love all the opportunity. They love the things that you can do outside. And I'd say 90+% of those people are like solid people. Like I've had very, very few interactions with people. Most people want to actually like move here, and they want to be part of a community. They don't want to be seen. I mean, you ask someone from California, if you meet somebody here and you're like, yeah, where'd you move from? And they're like, they whisper it like California. You're like, what? You're like, you can say it. It's okay. I'm not gonna. It's okay. Or they give you like some story. This is the other move. Well, I'm from California, but I have family that goes back generations in Montana, so I'm cool. I'm a cool California, and you're like, dude, it's all good. Don't worry. Like, you know, um, but what that's done. Especially too. I mean, I can't complain. Like people who have second homes, like they pay into the tax base that my kids take advantage of and go to school here. There's awesome schools. Like there's, I can't blame anybody for moving here when I moved here. And especially if you're moving here for like, the right reasons and
Mm-hmm.
the outdoors and recreation. So again, there's times where like it's frustrating, especially if you don't either have a lot of money or don't come from a lot of money, where you're like competing against, people and buying houses here. It probably still is insane. I don't know. But there's like
You
little
don't play the
things like
Zillow game?
I don't know. I'm like, I can't, what I'm in my house for and what we bought it for and the interest rate I'm in, like I told my wife the other day, I'm like, we can never move. Like we'll never be able to move because we can't ever get an interest rate that looks like this again. And we wouldn't be able to afford to live here now, I don't think, like to buy a house here now. We got very fortunate, like the timing we got here. So I think like anything, right? Like I'm sure there's plenty of people that, that moved here that were like, yeah, like, they bring their ideals and their politics and whatever. And they're like, yeah, I'll make it look like the same shitty place that I just left. I'm sure that does happen. It just, I guess the people that I interact with, I don't see it that often.
And how did you get into cattle ranching? I know on your bio on the website, you did some ranching on the side before this opportunity presented itself.
Yeah, so I had a very like I'd call it like non-traditional path into ranching. Something like I don't know. I always had interest in it. I grew up hunting. Like I grew up in Pennsylvania, where there was like a lot of farms and that kind of stuff. And I always just found it interesting. And then when I got out of the teams, like and kind of went into more of like an office type position that really didn't have that same level of physical, that combination of like mental, physical that you get in special operations. And so a buddy of mine who's a SEAL team guy who still does like a bunch of contracting stuff invited me up to one of his really good buddies, like family ranches. And I can't say I was very helpful at that point, but basically to come up and just, they had like a bunch of stuff going on and just needed an extra person basically. And I went up there and started working with those guys. And it honestly was kind of the first time since I had gotten out of the Navy where you just had this very team feel, right? Where everybody was working together. It was a task based deal versus like a time based. And it was hard, but you could tell there was all this skill involved in the people that had the skill and you didn't. There was this very big gap. And it just really like intrigued me. And I also just love the fact at the end of the day, I was tired. And it was something where you started to say to yourself like, oh, I want to get better at this. And a lot of people think that all those things are just things that you just can go out and do. And what you quickly learn is the people who do that stuff are like very skilled professionals. And I don't know, it kind of just planted a seed for me, and I just wanted to learn more about it. So what I did was I would go up there and I became more helpful as time went on. But I would go up there and they never paid me, and I never asked to get paid. But our deal was they had to answer my questions. And every time I'd come up there and I had a lot of questions. And so I kind of just started learning and getting better and just working on stuff on my own and reading about stuff. And when COVID hit, I had like an education thing through the GI Bill that I hadn't used. And so I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go to school for something I actually want to learn about. I never thought I'd be doing like anything with this full time. It was never in the cards. It was more just an interest that I had. And I was like, you know what, like, I'm just going to kind of, keep watering this seed, like strictly from like it was just like good for me mentally. Like it was just something I liked doing. And so I did like an online, it was like a year-long degree in beef cattle production. And as I was doing that, I was kind of just still like just learning and helping people and going up wherever I could. And eventually like I kind of built like some experience and I paired some education with it. And I started looking at like putting these leases together so other people own the ground. And my like original business plan was running other people's cattle. So I would put the ground together and then, so Kevin, let's say like you owned a ranch, but didn't actively ranch it. I'd be like, hey Kevin, like I'll lease your place. And then Greg, let's say you had cattle on a bigger operation and needed more grass. I would come and be like, hey Greg, like I can run the cattle for you. So basically I'd pay Kevin a lease fee and you'd pay me a management fee. And what was ever left is like kind of what you would make. And so through that kind of just like side hustle, just like business plan, whatever, I started learning about like, what does it take to put ground together? What does it take to put cattle together? How do you assess ground? And in 2020, late 2019, early 2020, I can't remember exactly, but like, when Tim was looking at selling Ascent Vision and did sell Ascent, I knew I wasn't going to stay on and work for like a large, corporate deal. Like that was not my vibe. And I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do, but Tim and I were talking one day and we were just talking about like, hey, what's everybody going to do next type of deal. And we came up with this plan where he's like, yeah, I've been interested in reinvesting in Montana, reinvesting in rural Montana. Him and I had talked about this ranch thing, but more just like the deployment talk, right? You're like sitting around like, what if, one day, wouldn't it be cool? Never thinking it was going to be like a real reality to any capacity. And to be honest, at the time, like I probably had I was like a one platooner, right? Like I had just enough experience to either get us in like a lot of trouble or be able to make, some decent assessments and decisions. And luckily for me, like I'd worked, enough with Tim, and his brother's a partner in the business as well. And I'd worked with those guys, at Ascent, and, I trusted them, they trusted me. And, they basically were like, hey, like, let's put something together. You've got the experience to kind of get us going on this thing. And, we'll come in on the, Tim on that more on the operational side, his brother more on the financial investment side to get us going. And we kind of came up with this plan to start Little Belt Cattle Company in late 2019, early 2020. We officially started it. We officially closed on the real estate in 2020. So our official start date is 2020. But we had been working on it like a lot of things, right? There's a lot of pre-work that goes into those things. So when you start, you're not developing the plan. And I think a lot of people don't realize how much, somebody explained it to me once. It's like you have your 9 to 5 and then you have your 5 to 9. And I'd say this was kind of our 5 to 9. And there was a lot of just, how are we going to do this? Like, what kind of ground do we need? Where are we going to look to do this? So we had started developing the plan, but really started executing the plan in 2020.
What's been the biggest surprise ever since?
Oh, that's a great question. I would honestly say the biggest surprise was how every single day it blows me away the level of complexity in agriculture and in beef cattle production. Beef cattle production as a whole is like a very segmented, phase line based business. So I would do one segment, and Kevin would do the next, you would do the next, somebody else would do the next, and each one of those phases or segments is like very complex. Like if you look at it from like a military operation, it would be like you have your breachers, you have your snipers, you have your comms guys, you have your JTACs, you have your medics, right? And each one of those skill sets is very specialized in what they're doing. And then there's this general skill set that like it all ties it together, right? Where all those skills come together. But if you just broke one of those down, it's like highly complicated, highly uh, uh, it's very like different than each one, right? And so the complexity of the business is continues to surprise me on a daily basis. And then another thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is the capital um, that it takes and the amount of capital at each one of those phase lines is very high. And the amount of capital that it takes, like in ag as a whole, it's just very capital intensive. And so the business skill set that goes along with this, and I would just say like from the the accounting, the cash flow projections, all of those things play a major impact in the business as a whole. So even for me, as we started out, and from like very similar to the military, like you start in this very like operational capacity, and as you kind of progress through the ranks, right, it becomes more administrative and much more focused on like the planning and the business planning. Like if you had told me the amount of time that I spend on Excel spreadsheets when we first got in to cattle ranching, I would be like, yeah, right, dude. Like, no way. Like, this is awesome. Like, you're outside.
I'm just riding horses, man.
Yeah, you're horseback. Yeah, every day. And there is a component of that. And what I tell people is that very similar to the military, right? There's like a component, and let's just say it's 10% of all the stuff that you're like, this is awesome. I love doing it. It's super fun. The weather's nice. But there's a 90, it's like jumping out of a plane, right? There's like 90% of bullshit for a 3-minute.
It's like anything in the special
military
operations community. It's like,
yes,
in military, especially special operations, where there's that 1% of pure thrill, adrenaline, fear that draws us all in, and then the other 99% of sitting around doing.
It's an iceberg, man.
Shit. Yeah.
Soft is like 100% like the definition of an iceberg. Everybody sees all the sexy stuff, but like there is so much bullshit. Not bullshit, but there's just like so much stuff that goes into doing all this well.
Yeah, and then
so many hours sitting in a tube waiting to get to the actual.
Get to the op, right? And then the thing is though, like for people who are good at that, and I'd say it's similar in agriculture and ranching, is that the people that truly want to do that job, right, for the right reasons. It's no different, the guys who go to Buds who want to be a SEAL. Like that's why I went to Buds. Like I didn't go to Buds to tell people, I went to Buds or to tell, I wanted to be a SEAL. Like I wanted to do that job, right? I wanted very much to do this job. And if the 99% of the bullshit makes it worth it for the 1% where you're like, yeah, we're doing it, buddy, then it's probably the right field for you, right? And if it's not worth it, then it's probably isn't. And that's something that you start to see very much, and is very surprising in this industry, like any business, right? Is you know there's parts of every kind of job, I think, that people go into that is the motivator for the rest of the additional stuff that it takes. And my job now, is we have, and we can talk more about this, but we've got a great team in place now, where in the beginning it was just Tim and I. And as we've built and grown this business now, we have a manager at the ranch and a team at the ranch. We've got management and a team in place at the feed yard. I've got an operations manager on the beef side of the business. And, my job very much now, similar, I'd say, to as you progress, especially like in the SEAL teams, is somebody's got to be doing that up and out. And you've got to have people doing the down and in. And very similar to the military is, if you're kind of that up and out guy, or gal, you're still expected to be able to have a skill set to go down and in if need be, right? So if you're the CO of a command and all of a sudden something happens on deployment, you still have to have a skill set and a baseline skill set to be able to jump in and participate, right? And the expectation of your people. Hang on one second. I just got to plug my computer in. The expectation of the people that work for you is that you still have like a very real skill set that to be able to perform. And it's very, very similar in agriculture. Hang on, let me just plug this in.
Yeah, you good?
No sweat.
Sorry, I had the cord standing by. I thought I had plugged it in before we started. All right, cool. Sorry. You can edit that out, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you have to, like, there's like almost like a respect level, right? Like if I show up to the ranch still and one of my guys is sick or hurt or something happens, and my guys are going to go out and, I don't know, they got to go like rope and load a bull or something, right? Like a technical skill set, it can be dangerous. Like I can't say to those guys like, oh, hey guys, like I've been on Excel the last few weeks. Like I'm a little rusty, right? Like, cause they're like, they still expect me to be able to do like all those things, right? But as we've built and grown this as a company and as a business, we've been really fortunate because we've kind of built a team as we've gone. And, I think Tim and I are both very much like believers of like, you kind of, you develop a position and then you fill that position and you got to move up to the next thing. And we've done that as we've gone across the board. So now, Little Bell Cattle Company, kind of my elevator speech on it, is a vertically integrated local supply chain of 100% Montana beef. So what that means is we do truly start to finish from like genetics all the way through, distribution of beef, which back to the phase line approach to beef production as a whole in the United States, is not the normal. And so what that allows us to do is basically provide quality assurance through that entire process. So people know exactly who and where. And that's a big thing now within a customer base, that people want to know who and where their food comes from. They want to know what they're feeding their family, and the availability has never been better for people to have access to, kind of local, food production, where instead of now having to go to a farmer's market, you can go online and have stuff delivered right to your door, right? You can find a producer that you like the way that they do business. And there's a lot of guys out there that, and I'm not knocking it by any means, there's, have that phase line approach. But what we've been committed to is truly doing it from like the very beginning all the way through. And I think a huge thing for us is we know exactly how those animals were treated. We know what the nutritional program was, and we know what the end result program was. And so because we've built that system and we built it from scratch. And one of the things, like when we got started with this, there was just as many people, if not more, were like, this is a bad idea. Nobody does a startup in agriculture. Nobody does startups in beef production. There was probably more people that told Tim and I that this was a bad idea. It's like when you tell people you want to go to Buds, and everybody who's never been to Buds is like, you'll never make it. Like, do you know what the failure rate is? Blah, blah, blah. And you're like, no, I'm just going to try it and see how it goes, right?
See how it goes.
And that's like the thing, right? Like the best thing, whenever people ask me, like, what's the best thing that you learn at Buds? It's the ability to just keep going and to get, like, to overcome. You lose every single day, right? And it's just the ability to go, hey, like, okay, I didn't lose as bad today, or I lost terribly today, but like, I'm just going to keep showing up. And that mentality is what we've used as we've developed this company. And in ranching, and we've had so many days where it didn't quite go your way, and there's so many parallels between agriculture and the military, as far as like, you can make the best plan in the world, you can brief it perfectly. The minute you step out the door, like cattle, for instance, they have a say. If you're a small team and you're running like a large group of cattle and you got to get from point A to point B, those cattle have a say, and that plan has to be flexible to what's happening around you. And I think like soft guys are very, very good at recognizing these subtle changes, but not just recognizing them, making decisions. And in a startup business, I think that's critical to success, where you start to feel like that momentum going against you. And if you stand by and just let that continue to build and grow, just like anything, right? It becomes like this massive snowball, and it's really hard to stop. But if you jump on it quickly and make a decision change, and that's been extremely beneficial to how we've kind of like not only like learned more and more, but also like figuring things out, is not being so stuck to a plan that you just you're so stuck to it that you're not going to make any changes. And in agriculture as a whole, a lot of times you see, multi-generational, that's more of the tradition in this space, is like a multi-generational family business basically that gets passed down. And there's a ton of knowledge that gets passed down, but there's also a lot of this, what I call, this is how we've always done it. And that can be a really hard mindset to break. And it also can be like a very bad, um, it can put you in a very bad position, because you just keep doing it and you're not changing, you're not growing, you're not, flexing to what's happening. And
What's been the biggest change you guys have seen, as far as you've worked with a bunch of different ranches, and how they
Mhm.
manage their cattle. You see how they do it, and then you and Tim are coming in without any cattle experience, and you're coming with fresh eyes and a different perspective, and you obviously have uh, a very technical background as well, and so you're able to bring in different platforms and softwares and processes. What's been the biggest thing, or one that you've noticed that it's like, oh, this is how everyone else is doing it? Why don't we do it this way? It's very different, it's drastically different, but this is why it's so much more beneficial now with the technology and the stuff available.